This image that we're looking at on the screen, if you've been upstairs, you've seen it up in the exhibition. And it's a Liao Dynasty Buddha, produced gilt bronze, produced in China at a time when the Liao Dynasty, the rulers, were non-Han Chinese. So the whole topic that I'm talking about tonight, how the Buddha became Chinese, is a little bit of a bait and switch, because Buddhism came into China and was promoted primarily by non-Han Chinese rulers who used Buddhism as a way to consolidate their political strength and power. And so the evolution of the Buddha image is not just responding to travel from India into China across the Silk Road, but also internal Chinese concerns or foreigners who are ruling Chinese and their concerns too. So the narrative is not quite as straightforward as you might imagine it to be, but that also makes it quite interesting. On the left, you'll see a Buddha, a Gandharan Buddha from Pakistan, Afghanistan. If you were at Pia's lecture last week, you're familiar with looking at those kinds of images. And on the right, you'll see one of the earliest gilt bronze Buddha images. It's in the Metropolitan Museum. It dates to about 425. And you can see the early images in China were very much based on their Indian prototypes. By that I mean, you can see how muscular the Buddha's body is, how perfectly the robe folds are. And this gilt bronze is patterned after this kind of model, a very muscular version of the Buddha, physical perfection reflecting the Buddha's spiritual perfection, but in an Indian ideal, meaning the Buddha looks like an Indian prince. As the Buddha becomes more and more Chinese, as Buddhism is assimilated in China, the Buddha stops looking like an Indian prince and starts looking like a Chinese scholar. So the form, the change, is reacting to that image, to the changes in the culture. Part of it is, how do you market a foreign religion in a country? By that I mean, in India, oftentimes, Buddhist monks will have to give up their property, leave their homes, and go live in the monastery. In China, that didn't fly. Confucian values of filial piety did not coincide with giving up your wealth and leaving your family. So those ideas were modified when they came into China. So the whole process of Buddhism coming into China is one of assimilation and adaptation. And it's the Chinese version, the Sinicized version of Buddhism, that then is moved to Korea, and then from Korea to Japan. And in the following weeks in the lecture series here at the Rubin, you'll see how that transformation continues to take place as Buddhism moves from each country to the next. And in the lecture tonight, I'll try to show you some images that link what happened in your lecture last week with some of the lectures in the following weeks. We often talk about Buddhism coming into China across the Silk Road from India. And Silk Road has become sort of a catch-all term. And so I want to put a little face on it for you by showing you a map and then also showing you some of the kinds of things that were traded on it. So we have China over here. This is the ancient capital of Chang'an, today known as Xi'an. This is, over here you have Gansu province and Xinjiang province in northwest China. So again, there's an issue because the Chinese borders kept changing. So what is China is also something that is not fixed in place over time. It's something that changes over time. You can see that these trading routes, and there's more than one Silk Road, connect China, not only with Iran, not only with Iraq, but also with Syria, with Jerusalem, also with the West, with Turkey, with ancient Greece and ancient Roman empires. So you can see this is Pakistan down here and Tibet. You can see the trade routes are going in many different directions. And the merchants are traveling along these trade routes, and the monks are traveling with them. And this is the path of transmission. This is how Enlightenment is exported from India. And here's Delhi down here, but from down here across the deserts into China. The cave temples at Dunhuang are really the first major point of entry into what was China proper at this time. So this is the first thing you'd see when you cross the Taklamakan and the Gobi deserts to come into China. And if you're coming from the Chinese direction, if you're going from east to west, it's your last outpost before you go across the Silk Road. And these deserts were very, very treacherous. Also, you can see this is all desert. So most of the places where the Buddhist cave temples are located are near where there are oases in the desert. And where the oasis is, where the water is, that's where the military garrison is built. That's where the Buddhist monasteries are being built. That's where the trading centers and the translation centers are also being built. So it very much, today, these are very obscure places. But back during the heyday of the Silk Road, starting in the Han Dynasty, this was sort of the superhighway of the ancient world. To give you an idea of the kinds of things that were traded on the Silk Road, you can see that we have silk and textiles, blue and white ceramics, gold, silver, all different kinds of things. People from China are trying to get horses from places like Fergana, which is today Samarkand, Uzbekistan. Those horses were supposed to be heavenly horses that were fast in battle. Chinese horses were, for the most part, had shorter legs and were good for plowing fields, but not so good for the cavalry. So a lot of the Chinese exploration going toward the west was searching for things like these heavenly horses. You can see things are going in both directions. And most times traders would just travel a small section of the Silk Road and not go the entire Silk Road itself. The monks, as I mentioned, would travel along with the merchants, and this is a tomb sculpture of foreign merchants coming across the Silk Road, found in a Chinese tomb. And if they were really, really wealthy merchants, they might have been using a traveling coffer like the one in the exhibition upstairs. I hope you had an opportunity to see this because it's really one of our treasures at the Brooklyn Museum. You can see this is lacquer that's been placed over a base of leather, bamboo, and wood. And what they did is they lacquered it with a very thick coat of black lacquer. And then they carved the lacquer, and then they rubbed either gold or color pigments on top of it. The gold part, it's called Tianjin technique or Changsai technique. And this same sort of technique was used in Islamic bookbinding. So if you look at Persian manuscripts and you look at the covers, the way the cover is made is very similar to how this trunk is made. Also, if you look at the flower pattern here, you'll see that it looks really similar to the kind of floral patterns you see on blue and white ceramics. So this sort of a trunk, the designs on it and how it was made, link this piece to all kinds of cosmopolitan trade routes and manufacturing techniques. You can see over here there's a mythical lion. He's chasing a brocaded ball that has ribbons. There are phoenixes here and also on the back. And when you look at it upstairs, it's really wonderful that you can walk around it so you can see the back. The cords would have come in these through these latches here and around the back, and you can actually see how the weight of those cords would have made marks on the trunk as they carried it on their packs on their horses as they were traveling. Now, there's also a little hidden treasure about this, and that is if you lift up that top cover, there's an inscription. And here's the inscription here. If you read Chinese, it says, Wenzhou Xin He Jia Aning Fang Xia O Jia Shenghuo. It means the O family made this. And the O family lived in Wenzhou. And they lived on Xinhe Street in Anning Prefecture. So if you were living at this time, this is where you would go to buy your leather trunk. For us, it puts it in a very specific place in time. The city of Wenzhou was famous for its lacquer production. And in northern Song Dynasty texts, we have lots of descriptions about how it was about 600 miles from the capital and it had the best lacquer. You can also see on this blow-up how the design is really carved into the leather, into the lacquer over the leather base, and then filled in with the gold and with the pigments. And of course, because it's the Rubin, we have to have some Tibetan references, right? So this is a Tibetan traveling trunk in the Newark Museum. You can see it's not as lavish as our lacquered trunk, but but it's the same kind of idea in terms of the roundels and how it's being made. The different perils of the Silk Road are shown in a painting inside one of the cave temples at Dunhuang. This is cave 45, which dates to the Tang Dynasty, so it's about 9th, 10th century. And if you go to China Institute, which is located on 65th between Park and Lex, the current exhibition there is an exhibition on Dunhuang, where the Dunhuang Academy has recreated 2 replica caves, including the cave that this comes from. So if you don't want to go to Northwest China, you can go to 65th Street and go on your Buddhist pilgrimage. But it's interesting because you can visually see what the walls, what the ceiling, what the total environment of a Buddhist cave is like. In this particular painting, you see foreign merchants. These merchants are from Central Asia. They're from Khotan. And we know that from their hats and their clothes. And you see this Chinese bandit. These bandits are brandishing their swords. And you see they're praying to Avalokiteshvara, known in China as Guanyin. Guanyin is the bodhisattva of compassion. They're praying, please don't let this guy cut off my head, right? And they've got to move quickly on this because you can see the packs have already come off all the pack animals, so the bandits are ready to take the stuff and go. We know exactly what's happening because there are these little cartouches to tell us the story. And these are stories that are actually from the Lotus Sutra. In this one down here, you see this poor guy cowering inside the jail, barbed wire all along the top. He's busy praying too. And it's working for him because his chains have come off, and this is a kung that would have been around his neck. And so that's come off too. Over here, this guy is praying so that he doesn't get eaten by this creature over here. I don't know, this creature is praying, so I'm not sure what's on that side there. Maybe he's worried that somebody's going to get him next. And then on the wall next to them is this painting of Avalokiteshvara, or Guanyin. And you can see that Guanyin in China at this time is already starting to look pretty androgynous. But if you look at the same bodhisattva in the Indian context, Avalokiteshvara is usually very physically male. So in China, Guanyin starts having a sex change operation. First, in the Tang Dynasty, starts becoming very androgynous. But a few centuries later, Guanyin, that bodhisattva, is depicted as female. And you pray to Guanyin if you want more children or if you want your children to be healthy. So the purpose, the function of the bodhisattva, again, changes to meet Chinese needs. When you look at the images, I want you to realize that we see them completely out of context. This is what the entire cave 45 looks like at Dunhuang. So the paintings I just showed you are on this wall here. So all 4 walls and the ceiling are all painted. You will have a Buddha surrounded by bodhisattvas, lokapalas, or guardian figures on the end. And on the sides, on this wall, you have the stories I just showed you from the Lotus Sutra. And on this side, you have Buddhist paradise, shown as a Chinese palace would be. On the ceiling, this sort of looks like a gridiron. It's called the Thousand Buddhas pattern. It sort of looks like wallpaper almost on the cave. They used a stencil to paint these everywhere. And this is actually a meditation tool for something called forming. You say the name of the Buddha, and each time you see one of these images, you repeat the name of the Buddha, and that's supposed to help put you in a trance, to help you with your meditation. At the center, you have a heavenly well. Notice right direct path over the head of the Buddha. This heavenly well is supposed to be a portal that will take you directly to heaven. And it's used in earlier Han Dynasty tombs as well as in Buddhist caves. Some of the same imagery you see in mortuary culture in China, you'll also see in Buddhist caves, which is kind of logical. Because if you think about it, the goal is to get to heaven, right? So you're trying to get to heaven from both places. And so the same sort of architectural features and imagery are repeated. This is a detail from that cave. You can see the bodhisattva and the lokapala quashing the demon down here. And you can also see that the lokapala has a very foreign-looking face. Lokapalas, guardian figures, tend to have foreign faces. grooms for camels, grooms for horses, entertainers. There's certain job positions that when they're depicted in Chinese art, they usually have foreign faces. And this is a painting of the famous monk Xuanzang. Xuanzang, we're talking about exporting enlightenment from China. But I want you to realize that when Buddhism came into China across the Silk Road, the sutras, the Buddhist texts, didn't come in a sequential fashion. They came in out of order. And there were lots of holes in the doctrine. And so those holes were filled by things from earlier Chinese cosmology. So at early Buddhist caves at Dunhuang, you may see the Buddha. Next to the Buddha, you may see the Hindu deity Vishnu. Next to Vishnu, you may see the Queen Mother of the West, who in the Han Dynasty in China was an important cosmological figure. They're basically throwing everything up at the wall to see what hits, because they don't really understand what the doctrine is yet. In this, Xuanzang, a Chinese monk, is going back to India, what he says, in search of the law, in search of Buddhist doctrine, trying to get more accurate versions of the sutras. Because also, remember, the sutras aren't originally written in Chinese. They're written in Sanskrit. They're written in other languages. And these foreign monks from Kashmir or India or South Asia have to have them translated into Chinese. And there might be 2 or 3 translators before it actually gets into Chinese. And if somebody mistranslates something along the way, or if there's no equivocal Chinese term for a certain philosophy, again, you're going to fill in the blanks with something that you know, something that you believe in. And this is all part of making Buddhism Chinese, but also selling it to the local population. These 2 images are both in the collection of the Met. Again, you can see how the Indian image and the Chinese image, that this image is based on this, the sense of the body, the kind of monastic robe, the square shoulders, the square head. So this is what the Buddha image looks like in China early in the adaptation of Buddhism in China. And I want you to realize that you can't just make a Buddhist image and have it work in worship. First, you have to ritually activate it or ritually consecrate it. One of the ways you can do that is by putting relics inside the Buddha. Now, the relics can be sutras, they can be Buddhist texts, or they can be sacred objects. They can be treasured objects called the sapna ratna. They could be coral, pearls, gold, crystal. A lot of these are luxury goods that were being traded on the Silk Road. So this image, you can see it would have been attached to a larger altarpiece this way. The Buddha would have had bodhisattvas and lokapalas on either side. And then inside here would have been the relics. There are other ways you can also ritually activate Buddhist images. One of them is to paint in the eyes of the Buddha. Another way is to do a dedicatory inscription, dedicate it to somebody. And I'll show you examples of those as we go farther along. This is an example of a reliquary. These are the kinds of relics you might have inside of the reliquary. This is a Gandharan reliquary, and you can see gold and crystal and pearls, and also important objects, different seals. Now, as the Buddha becomes Chinese, I mentioned he's going to start looking more like a Chinese scholar, and it happens at this time from about 420 to 525. In that 100 years, there's a change in the Buddha image. So here you have your very Indianized Buddha, and then he starts looking very Chinese. You see, instead of square shoulders, he's got rounded shoulders. His head is more oval-shaped, and the sense of the body completely disappears. Instead, his body is covered up by this drapery. We call this pattern fishtail drapery. He's standing on a lotus, symbol of rebirth in Buddhist paradise. This is the flaming pearl of Buddhist wisdom. Lions represent his clan, the Sakya clan. He has guardians and bodhisattvas. And his mudra, his hand position, it's called the do not fear mudra. It refers to a story, an earlier story in the life of the Buddha, one of the Jataka tales, where the Buddha went to a village and there was a herd of rampaging elephants. And he put his hand out. He said, "Do not fear. Have faith in the Buddha." And the elephants stopped rampaging and everybody was safe. So it's a gesture of reassurance, of faith. And it's something that's very, very popular in Chinese Buddhism. If you take the rest of the altarpiece away from that central image, you can see how the body has changed so dramatically. Completely covered up. This is a detail of the mandorla at the top. These are flying apsaras, or angels here. These are Dharma Chakra, wheels of the law, in the shape of lotus petals. And this is a detail of the flaming pearl of Buddhist wisdom. Now the flaming pearl is here, but you see people praying on it here and here, and he's sort of holding up the fort at the bottom. And then on the side, the bodhisattvas and the devotees, all on lotus flowers. Again, this is another example of an early image in China, very square and chunky and blocky. And this is an Asian Art Museum in San Francisco. It's one of the earliest gilt bronzes that we have. And this is in the Musée Guimet in Paris. You can see how long and skinny. It looks like, almost like Gumby. They've pulled out and stretched out the Buddha image so that he's long and skinny. And you can see we start having a pattern that we call a waterfall of drapery coming over the throne. And this pattern, this idea of the very rounded shape of the Buddha, is then what's transmitted to Korea, and then from Korea to Japan. So back to, this is my last map actually. You can see India here, Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha achieved enlightenment, Sarnath, where he gave his first sermon, through Tibet to China, across the Silk Road to China, and to places like Dunhuang, and then from Dunhuang to sites at Yungang Caves, Lungmang Caves, the capital at Xi'an, and then from here to Korea, and then from Korea to Japan, which is over here. Or through South Asia to Indonesia, or to Southeast Asia. And if you keep coming to all the Rubin lectures, you will see that there are lectures on Buddhism going in each of these different directions. And so you can get the full breadth of the exportation of enlightenment to all these countries. But you just have to come down to the Rubin and hear about it here. This is one of the images in the exhibition upstairs. It's a seated bodhisattva, a vision of Maitreya, who becomes the Buddha of the future, dating to the northern Zhou. And it's the earliest Chinese Buddhist image in our collection. And it's a very rare image. This was probably, most likely, from a private shrine. This time period, you can see the dynasty is for a very short period of time, so it's very rare to have things from the northern Zhou dynasty in collections, in museum collections. And we're very, very lucky to have this. You can see the waterfall of drapery here. You see how the face has become rounder, the shoulders are still round. And the northern Zhou, which rules in North China, is again a non-Han Chinese dynasty. And this is an image from Korea. This is from the Three Kingdoms period. So you can see how the waterfall of drapery moves to Korea from China. And in a few weeks, I think Bob Mowry is coming here, and he'll be talking about the introduction of Buddhism in Korea, and I'm sure he'll be using this image. Even though this is being transmitted, look at how much more approachable this Buddha is. Korean Buddhas tend to be a lot more interactive with the worshiper than Chinese. The Chinese Buddhas tend to be very formal. It's almost as if I were looking straight back at the room, into the back of the room, instead of making eye contact with you. They're looking above and beyond you and not down at you, making that eye contact with you. And then it's this Korean image of the Buddha that goes to Japan. This is the Shaka Triad. The Shaka Triad that I'm sure Max Marmon is going to be talking about next week at the Rubin. And Shaka for Shakyamuni. You can see the exact same pattern here. The bodhisattvas on their lotuses, the flaming pearl of Buddhist wisdom. Now, I mentioned that another way to ritually activate an image was by an inscription. And that's how this one was ritually activated. On the back of the mandorla, on the back of the halo, there's an inscription dedicating it to the recovery of Prince Shotoku, from illness. Prince Shotoku was the Prince Regent of Japan. This was dated about 623. And he used Buddhism as a way to try to unify Japan during a civil war. And this is dedicated by Empress Sueko to his recovery from illness. And when he died, it was rededicated to his rebirth in paradise. The reason people are paying for the creation of these sculptures and these bronzes is because they can earn Buddhist merit. Now, what I mean by earning Buddhist merit, if you do a good deed or if you commission Buddhist art, you earn Buddhist merit, which you can keep for yourself, and it will help you on your rebirth in paradise. Or if, let's say, your parent isn't well, you can donate it to your parent, and hopefully it will help them on their recovery from illness. And it's that kind of dedicatory inscription, that purpose of earning Buddhist merit, which is propelling and really creating this frenzy for the creation of sacred art. One last thing about this Japanese image, and that is the artist who made it. The sculptor's name is Toribushi. He was descended, his grandfather was a Chinese craftsman of Buddhist image who emigrated to Japan. So it's not just images and iconography that's moving, the craftsmen are moving from country to country also. You can see this is a far cry from the Indian Buddha that we looked at earlier. This is one of the newest additions to our Chinese art collection at the museum. This just came into the museum last year. It's from a Chinese collection that was put together in the 1940s. And it's a reliquary in the shape of a stupa, as you can see. It's about this big. It's quite large. And it has a wonderful inscription that goes all around the sides. It's in 4 parts, this part, this part, this part, and this. And my first day of work, I went into art storage, and the first thing I did was take it apart because I wanted to see what it looked like on the inside. And so I brought pictures of it taken. You'll never see it this way in our museum, but I brought pictures of it taken apart so you can see. So those are the parts. So you have Jataka stories or lives for the earlier stories of the earlier lives of the Buddha around here. At the base here, there's a very long inscription, which I'll show you in a moment. Here's the Chatravali. Now, I'm going to show you a detail of the area up here, which is a beautifully, beautifully designed lotus. And then also of this. This is the inside of the stupa. So relics or sacred objects would have been probably in a small glass bottle that was placed right here. This beautiful lotus, nobody would have seen it, but that's where the relics were placed. These are some other views of some of the other Jataka stories. This is the top. Isn't that gorgeous? And again, the Chatravali goes right through the center here. It's not something that you would normally see. And here's the inscription, and that beautiful, beautiful lotus here. And the inscription reads, it tells us who commissioned the stupa, why they commissioned the stupa, where they lived, and it gives an exact date. It was commissioned on September 30th in the year 986, and it was made by a man named Li Lingshun. So the monk Sung Chung, who expounds the Vimalakirti Sutri at the Weigwa Monastery on Zaw Avenue, he gives you the address of his monastery, and his mother, Madame Zhao. Now, don't think that just because you're a monk at a famous Buddhist monastery, you can get away with not including your mother in your inscription, right? So, and his mother, Madame Zhao, and here it is down here, the character. There's the character for mother here. It's very, very clear, straightforward. It starts off with the date. And then to be manufactured, a silver reliquary stupa in the form of the stupa, the Abundant Treasures Buddha, dedicated to Maitreya, and you can see that it goes on and on. It is very rare to have this long an inscription, to have this precisely dated an inscription, not just who commissioned it, but who made it. So this is one of the great treasures of the museum, and yes, it's one of my favorite pieces. I love the stupa. This is the image that we started the lecture with, this wonderful gilt bronze Buddha. But I also wanted to show you that it also has an inscription of the date. So you can't really see this in the case, but it was made in the Ejo year, which dates it to either 965 or 1025. There are 12-year cycles, so it's unclear which of the 12-year cycles it was. That's why it's one of these two dates. Oh, and this one is hollow on the inside, so it would have had relics inside, but the relics on this one no longer are there. And this beauty, this bodhisattva upstairs, dates to the Jin dynasty. Now, all of the Buddhas and bodhisattvas I've been showing you from the Brooklyn collection, they're all from dynasties, the Jin dynasty, the Northern Zhou dynasty, the Liao dynasty, when non-Han Chinese were ruling China. Because that is when the greatest influx, greatest manufacture and creation of these Buddhist images took place. This is a real treasure. And I really have to thank the Rubin for choosing it. The Rubin chose which objects were coming to this exhibition. And we had all the objects conserved and cleaned and everything before they came. And so Bodhisattva had a lot of dust and grime cleaned off of him before he came here. And he just looks stunning now. And when you go upstairs, I want you to think about the height he's at, because he looks fabulous in the case. He's at the right height so that he's looking down at you, making some eye contact with you. And I just think they did a beautiful job at the installation, the wall colors and the mounts and everything. And I hope that when we do our reinstallation, and Tim, it's 2015, not 2014 when we reopen. I almost had a heart attack a year early, we wouldn't be ready. I hope we do justice to these images the way they are shown at the Rubin. You can see the wood has traces of polychrome. So this was most likely ritually activated by painting in the eyes. You can see, again, this is a Gandharan bodhisattva. Very different sense of the body from India, or this is Pakistan, Afghanistan, actually, to China, as the image gets softer and rounder. And this is the back of the image. You're never going to see the back of it, but I just wanted to show you, because when this was in conservation getting ready to come here, I wanted to check and see if it had relics in the back, if there was any place where they could have put the relics. And there's this little hole in the back, but I checked with the conservators, and they think that this was used to attach it to the wall as part of a tableau with other Buddhas and bodhisattvas. It's not for relics. And this is how the bodhisattva looked in the museum in 1938. This is a picture of our 1938 Chinese galleries. It came into the museum the year before, and Bodhisattva was rocking the galleries even then. This is another one of our treasures. This is the Bodhisattva Guanyin. I showed you before, painted on the wall at Dunhuang. It's very unusual in that it comes from Yunnan province in southern China, down by where the Vietnam border is. And so there are lots of relationships between this image and things that we see in Southeast Asia, and that's a whole nother lecture topic. This is from the Dali Kingdom, the 11th, 12th century. And I have to thank the Rubin again for this, because we had a great revelation, a fabulous revelation, when we were conserving this to come here. The image was x-rayed as part of its conservation, and we found out, much to our joyful surprise, it still has the relics inside. So I will be, in a moment, I will be showing you the x-rays with the relics inside. And thank you to our conservation department for sharing those with me. Oh, before I explain, it's placed, it has a tang in the bottom. These are the bottom of the feet. Again, you're never going to see these photos on our website. But I wanted to show you how it was attached into the sculpture. The arms and the feet are solid. The rest of it's hollow. Now, it was made using lost wax casting, but it had a clay core. The core, some of the clay core is still down here, but the core was carved out of the top of the torso so that the relics could be put inside. If you look at the back, which you can't in the case upstairs, but you can see here, you can see Bodhisattva has these two little square plaques here. So this is all has clay core in it. But this is where the relics were placed. And after the relics were placed, this has sort of a reddish color to it, they lacquered it with cinnabar. And so that's what the red color is here. Now the Met also has a Bodhisattva Guanyin from this kingdom, and they've done extensive tests on it. Theirs does not have relics. It has more gilding, but no relics. And theirs has these little hidden doors in the back in the exact same locations as ours. I mean, it was made in exactly the same way. But that reddish color, they tested it in our conservation lab because for two reasons. First off, they wanted to see what it was, but also when they x-rayed it, whatever it was, blocked the x-ray. So they wanted to know what it was made out of. And here, I love this, it's like Bodhisattva floating in space, don't you think? This is the first x-ray image of the Bodhisattva. You see how the cinnabar blocks what's directly in back of it? But you see these little things here? Those are the relics. So there are 3 beads and twisted wire, which is probably gold wire. We don't know if the beads are pearls, if they're coral, if they're precious gems, if they're glass. We don't know. And since we're never going to open up the Bodhisattva to find out, we can all guess. But we know it's not paper. We know it's not sutras. And so that's here. Now you see this looks like there's a little nail or something in his head, poor guy. The nail actually was something that was placed to keep the clay core in place when they were casting the bronze. And the Met's also has some sort of nail or pin in the head to keep the core in place. And here you can see the relics a little bit better. The last image I want to talk about is this cloisonné shrine that's up in the galleries. And it's going to confuse the story of how the Buddha became Chinese even more, if that's possible. This image, this shrine, was made during the time period in the Qing dynasty, during the time of the Qianlong Emperor, 736 to 1795. And it's the gift of a man named Samuel Avery, who gave this to the museum in 1909. In 1909, he gave about 100 Chinese cloisonné objects to the museum, some of them huge, some of them this high. Fabulous, fabulous objects. Many of them had come from palaces. He had also bought things in China. Members of the Chinese imperial family had actually given him a few of the objects. When these came into the museum in 1909, as I mentioned, there were over 100. From about 1948 to 1950, a number of them were deaccessioned. So now we have about 40 of them, including this one. And this image is incredibly interesting for a number of reasons. First, the technique of cloisonné is coming into China from the West, from Europe. And then we have relationships with things happening in the West. This has influences going in every which direction. Part of that is the Qianlong Emperor, who, like his father, the Yongzheng Emperor, was very cosmopolitan. He had Jesuit missionaries from Italy at his court. There was a lot of foreign influence at this time. So the craftsmanship, the idea of using cloisonné is something that's coming into China. The pattern here looks like a Lei Wen pattern or a thunder pattern that you'd see on early Chinese ritual bronzes. The Buddha image himself, he has the waterfall of drapery that we've been looking at in the sinicized Buddhist images. The shape of the stupa is coming in one way from India, but then there's another influence on top of it too. Now, I also found a 1912 image, and this is how the shrine looked in the gallery in 1912. And it had no Buddhist context to it. It was just put with other objects from the cloisonné collection. You can see the Buddha has the waterfall of drapery here, the gemstones inlaid. Look how abstracted the fire pattern around him is. At the top, you can see the beautiful lotus and the bells. Remember that a Buddhist temple is supposed to be fulfilling for all your senses. sense of sound, the sense of smell. You can smell the lotus. It's not just that it symbolizes rebirth in paradise. It's not just that you would have this kind of smell. You might smell incense in the temple too. It's supposed to attract all your senses. Here at the top of the columns, you have these makaras coming from Indian tradition, but then you have these dragons crawling up the sides of the columns. And then there's the shape. The shape of this stupa is based on the baldacchino over St. Peter's tomb in the Vatican. Look at the columns and look at these. Now, these have dragons wrapped around them, but it's based on this. Now, the irony is that when this was built by Bernini, these columns were supposed to represent the columns of King Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. King Solomon's temple where the Ark of the Covenant and the Ten Commandments were found. So you have, and the Qing dynasty, the Qianlong emperor, is ethnically Manchu. So you have a Manchu emperor ruling China, trying to be Chinese, using Chinese dragons, using a foreign technique, referring to earlier Chinese ritual bronzes, and building his Indian stupa in the shape of the tomb of St. Peter. So which direction are things going in? And we know that their influence of Western architecture in China at this time, because the Summer Palace, the Yuanmingyuan, has certain buildings that were modeled on European buildings. So we know that their influence is going in both directions. In a sense, this is a kind, it's often been called reverse chinoiserie. Chinoiserie when Chinese things come into the West, or you see somebody wearing a dress that has like dragons on it, and it's like, Chinese influence in fashion, right? Here you have an Italian architecture influencing a Chinese reliquary stupa, rather a cloisonné shrine. So things are going in every which direction, and I'm about to make it even more complicated. I want you to look at these, again, these columns, the pillars with the dragons wrapped around them, because when I saw them, the first thing, here's another view of St. Peter's. The first thing I thought of was Tibetan rugs in Tibetan temples, which go up and wrap around the pillars like this. Look at these, and you can see, perhaps, because also the Qianlong emperor followed Tibetan Buddhism. And by the way, it's the Rubin, right? Tibetan influence. But you can see, these look just like Tibetan pillar carpets wrapped around a temple. And this is an archival photo, probably from the 1920s or 30s. It's of a temple in Qinghai. Qinghai is next to Tibet in China. And you can see how they wrap around. And it looks very similar to how the columns are on the four sides of the shrine. Now, I wanted to tell you a little bit about the Qianlong emperor, because that also tells a little bit about how he sees himself and how he views foreign influence. This is Qianlong, and this is his father, the Yongzheng emperor. And in this, notice, though they're not Chinese, they're wearing Chinese clothes, they're acting like Chinese scholars, holding bamboo, the symbol of the Confucian scholar, because bamboo bends but doesn't break. Bamboo is a symbol of their righteousness. Passing a plum blossom, because he's passing rule onto him. Mind you, the Qianlong emperor commissioned this painting after his father was already dead. He's looking back, rewriting history, because he didn't know that he was actually going to assume the throne until after his father died. His father kept everybody guessing. So he's going back and trying to create a lineage for himself. Now, this is his father, the Yongzheng emperor, who liked to do masquerades, liked to wear different clothes from different cultures. Here he's looking like a Mongol nobleman. And the idea of masquerades is something that was really popular in Europe at this time. European noblemen putting on different costumes, having these masquerades. And we know that they were aware of this custom. So here he is as a Mongol nobleman. And this is my personal favorite. This is the Yongzheng emperor in a painting as a French nobleman. And these paintings that I'm showing you were all in the Palace Museum in Beijing. Here he is looking like a Taoist recluse, summoning the power of the dragon. And then his son does the same thing. Here's Qianlong riding his horse in Manchu clothes with a Tibetan temple here, but with a miniature version of the Temple of Heaven. In front of it, the Temple of Heaven is where Chinese emperors traditionally did their sacrifices to the ancestors, and then a Tibetan stupa in back of him. Here, Qianlong is dressed up like a Chinese scholar, playing the qin, a musical instrument, in front of a landscape painting that he himself painted in his garden, looking like a traditional Chinese scholar. Here he is in his formal court robes, traditional Chinese-style court robes. But the idea of having a full frontal portrait is something that's coming out of Western portraiture. And here we see from his albums foreigners coming to pay tribute to him at the imperial palace. Here we have it in the Forbidden City in Beijing. People from all different lands coming to see him, to pay their respects. And then this sort of takes it full circle. The Qianlong emperor painted as the Bodhisattva Manjushri. The Bodhisattva is wisdom. So he's not just showing himself as the ruler of the mundane world, but of the spiritual world too. And he's doing it in the form of a tanka, a Tibetan tanka. There are about 8 versions of this painting of the Qianlong emperor as Manjushri. The story is going to get even more twisted. His favorite court artist at the time, an artist named Lan Cherning, he was an Italian man, an Italian Jesuit missionary. His name was Giuseppe Castiglione. Giuseppe Castiglione painted the face of the Qianlong emperor as the Bodhisattva Manjushri. Here he is. There is the emperor. This is another version that's in the Palace Museum in Beijing. And the attributes of Manjushri are here. You see there's another little guy up here. This is actually his teacher, his guru, who was teaching him about Tibetan Buddhism. And I want to read you the inscription that's right there, which the inscription is in Tibetan. It says, Manjushri, sharp-witted sovereign of men, playful, unexcelled, great Dharma king, on the diamond Vajra seat, feet firm, may your wishes spontaneously meet good fortune. This painting was originally kept in Puning Se, the Temple of Universal Tranquility, at the Qing Imperial Summer Retreat in Chengde. The temple itself was dedicated to the submission of the Mongols. So the Buddhist temple is commemorating a military victory. And this is a mandala made for the Qianlong emperor. Out of the lotus here, you have a Chinese, very traditional style Chinese temple, Chinese temples here. But then you have Indian makaras, and then these syllables are Om Mani Padme Hum, the mantra. And bodhisattvas and guardians and people having tribute here as this miniature view of the world. And then on these metal wire coming up among the clouds, this is the Chinese character for sun and moon, just like you would have in a Chinese cosmological painting going back to the 3rd century. So again, taking things from Chinese culture, taking things from Indian culture, mixing it together to make Chinese, the Buddha Chinese. So how does the Buddha become Chinese? Is it a Manchu emperor in masquerade as the Bodhisattva Manjushri? Is it a Buddhist image here, made under the Liao dynasty, again made under non-Han Chinese, but wearing very Chinese robe? So when you think of it, and when you come to the lectures over the next few weeks, I want you to think about not just the transmission, but also the marketing of Buddhism, and how things keep changing to suit the needs of the people who are promoting it at the time. Thank you very much.